of emotion and the outburst, the absolute feelings, the absolute grotesque, the detachments that people feel at the very deepest sense. And I want to kind of go very, very deep here, like going like what they call 6 feet under the, the sphere of the bodies where the bodies are buried. I want to kind of go there, and I want to kind of go pretty deep into this, our reality, like what we experience in the midst of the mind, what people call the superconscious. And I do think it's quite interesting, though, when we discuss horror. It's a topic where a lot of people are abashed to discuss. They're quite reticent to discuss horror because it awakes the devil inside. And I do think this is also why a lot of people abstain from watching horror, and while they also, you know, why horror to them is an irate topic, and why they ban their kids or their siblings or their significant others from actually indulging in horror or delving into it deeper. But I do think horror is something that is with us. It is something that is extremely important to announce. And I don't think that we can completely push it away, because it is one thing that Jung has said. And if you watch a lot of Jordan Peterson, I don't, but if you watch, you would see his fascination with Carl Jung. And I do think Jung is going very deeply into the depths of and the layers of the superconscious, the unconscious, and the ego and the ID, and the mind's layers, the storage capacity, and why we fear, why we are what we are, and the emotions. So this video will kind of touch on this, but I also want to bring a kind of new kind of audience into my videos, and I want to bring a kind of suffering audience, like the people who have just lost somebody. I do think my video will hinge onto that as well, because I would talk about topics that I do think will definitely be beneficial as an ear to people who are suffering emotionally, and to have a bit of a spiritual devoidness where they are feeling detached from society, or they just want an ear. They just want to reconnect with someone who's a bit the same, on the same layer, on the same crystal vase as they are. So my obsession with horror started pretty early in my life, though. I will talk about it about later in this video, but I'm going to start off with children. And other children, I mean, when I was little, other children watch horrors. Like children at the age of 4 watch horrors. We had I can't remember, there was a horror, the first horror movie I ever watched was, I remember this scene, and maybe you guys will know, and I really want to know what this movie is. I have, I have a, I have a bit of a precognition to what the movie might be. But it was about a monster, and I do think it's Species, because we watched Species. It was 1990s horror movie and stuff, but we watched Species too, and I think I was about 10 years old. But I do think it's Species, if you ask me. It's like in that league of Species, but it's about, I'll tell you guys, I got a lot of nightmares about this. But it's about a monster that goes loose. And I remember the scene where two people, it's a man and a woman, and they're running away. They're in the forest, they're making a fire, and they're running away from a big monster. And this monster is a very hairy monster. And in the end of the movie, I remember, now this is the telltale sign of the movie for you guys who watch it. I'm pretty sure someone would know what the movie is. I'm still trying to find it. But in the end, the guys watch, this, I just remember he has blonde hair. He looks a bit like Harrison Ford. He looked a bit like Harrison Ford, just a skinnier version. I can remember his blue eyes and his blonde hair. And I could remember at the end there was a net, and the monster would hide behind that net. He was opening a room, and he had a sword with him. And I remember the scene where he cut off the head of the monster or something. Or he fought a guy in armor all of a sudden. And then he opened the armor and saw there was this little elf, no, not this elf, this little midget in the armor. And then he kind of felt sorry, and he put a little band-aid on where he kind of, well, he thrust the sword into the belly of this armored man. And then he saw it was this little midget guy, and he felt sorry for him. And he put a little cloth on the point, or the intersection point where the sword crossed the skin, and he felt really, really sad about what he did of killing this poor midget guy. That's all I remember. And I really tried, I think it's Species, one of the Species movies, or one similar to those, but that's like the first horror movie I ever saw. And I was quite traumatized in a way by this movie. Not traumatized, but the scenes of a monster. If everyone asked me what a monster looked like, I thought about that hairy thing in that movie. And it was, to me as a kid, it was just like, everything as a kid is kind of dragging. And that was like dragging to me. I remember years on, I would think about what exactly is this movie. And I never saw it. I think I saw it twice in different, like asynchronously, I saw it twice. Sorry, I'm just typing something on the computer. But, well, to get back in hindsight, other children watched horrors, right? And it was something we were kind of bored to watch at an early age. And I think after that first movie, like, well, my parents, they definitely saw me to be, I was quite, I was light-skinned in a lot of ways. I was extremely, just because I was extremely deep. Some people said I was psychic and stuff, and because I had extremely vivid experiences as a kid even, I would have visions and very, very deep dreams of seeing Jesus and stuff. So, other kids watch horrors at a very early age. Like I knew kids who were 7 or 8, and they watched a whole string of horrors back then. And it was something we were barred from looking at for a reason. And I was extremely sensitive to this emotional burnout from horrors. But officially, I finished my first horror film at the age of about 12. It was 13 Ghosts, and at the time I left. It left quite a dent in me as well. It left quite a dent in my memory. The 13 Ghosts, it was like the first actual horror movie I watched, almost like the new wave of horror movies. And I don't think I was really emotionally ready for that movie yet. I was only 12 years old. And I remember the visual imagery of the supernatural, this absolute supernatural ghosts bleeding, and this memories of this old house with all these ghosts in it. And it left quite a mark in my memory. And I think all the supernaturalism wasn't good for me at that age. I just don't think I was mentally ready for that indoctrination of, But a friend told me to watch it, and I watched it unbeknownst. I watched it with his friend. Obviously a tough guy narrative, I watched it with this friend, and it wasn't the best thing actually for me. But I want to kind of move you to a new point of intellectual horror, away from art or visual horror. I want to move to intellectual horror. And, horror as a theme. If I ask about horror as a theme to reality, what you get with Lovecraftian horror, almost like this, it's not just visual imagery of a thing, it's more like an impending doom out of reality. It's not a horror where you can't sleep at night, but it's a reality of a horrific reality, like a hellish reality. That to me is like the intellectual horror I want to discuss, in a moment. But intellectual horror was quite attractive to me, as it signified something deep about our world and about our minds as well. And I think that's what Jung and Dostoevsky was particularly attracted to, is this intellectual kind of horror in man. Now, what it signifies to me is the man without a chance, in horror. Now, this comes to me, it's kind of hinging again on reality, about the man without a chance. And if you think about, let's say the Scream of Edward Munch, or you think about, the Van Gogh, collections, of sketches and stuff. You think about a man without a chance, a real man. Or you think about someone like Hans Christian Andersen, the creator of The Little Mermaid. That's like what you think about a man without a chance. And this is kind of the classical sense of horror that I want to kind of get to, this idea of impending doom in a way that the reality of such people was never to be, and they just always lost out. And that's kind of a theme that was interesting to me after, I guess, a life of failure. I guess that's, in a classical sense, I probably am a man without a chance myself. And that's why it really just pertains to me, this theme of the specific theme of horror in humans. Now I want to kind of talk about, I do think recalling, I want to recall a Disney movie, and I think you guys remember the Disney movie The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but it's probably the most realistic Disney movie ever created, in the way that it is about it's realistic, and the guy doesn't get the girl. Like it ends with a realistic motion that the guy, like, the hunchback doesn't get the girl. He doesn't get cured of his ailment, being a hunchback and stuff. And I think this is what makes this movie so real, and why I kind of like this movie, not because of its beauty and emotion, but it struck me as unique and very, very real in Disney's sense. That this movie was really different than, let's say, the Cinderella generation or the Rapunzel generation of movies, because this was actually about a movie an adult can watch and say, yeah, that's reality, as opposed to, let's say, Cinderella or Rapunzel or, what's the other movies that you get, but you guys get the picture. And I think this is just one of those movies that really just strike a chord with me, of reality and, almost like this insurgency that it is. As a kid, I do think it boils all the way down to probably how I was as a kid. I was extremely creative, maladaptive daydreaming I always suffered from, and I was at an early age diagnosed with, I think the psychiatrist said I might have ADD. So I was prescribed ADD or ADHD medication, and I was put on a differential diagnosis to aid this beast of my mind. And I do think that, like, the way I was born was just, I don't think I was really born with a chance. I was never really structured. So for me, the horror of the world was actually very attractive, because it was almost like this hidden layer, this backdoor to reality that very few people dare to kind of tread, and very few people with unless you were a child who really was investigative, but most people was just, they were scared, especially in the Christian circles, of the horror Satan, the horror of reality. And just like, it was something I viewed as almost like a challenge to overcome. And I do think it's also part of my mental illness, because I was born with OCD. I had troubling OCD at the age of 4 years old, 3 years old. I couldn't sleep. Because I would dream. I would have nightmarish dreams, and I wouldn't be able to sleep. I would be scared to go to bed at night, and it really marked a very, very difficult reality, being early on and just being very scared to go to bed, because I had these nightmares that nobody really knew where it came from, and just had these weird dreams. I'm going to quickly just think about. I think this is interesting with mental illness, because mental illness as general, like, I do think people born with mental illness, there's like a kind of pyrrhic victory, to overcome mental illness, as is believed, because I don't think one could actually truly overcome mental illnesses that they were predestined to. I think it leaves scars in some way other than not. And I mean, the way I was born with a specific mental illness that left me scars all my life through. And to talk about horrors, I do think that this was a horror in and of itself. But I battled with nightmares, and I told you this before, but I always had, at a very early age, I had these weird nightmares where they were almost apparitional. And, like a ghostly. It was like, at the age of 4, I think, I had a vision. And there was this ghost, and he said he was going to destroy me, my life. And I had a very good friend at that time. He was into dream interpretation. And he told me a couple things about it. I can't remember it, but, it was not a very good interpretation that he gave me. And it's quite late at night, so I don't really want to talk about these things. But in grade 7, when I was 7, I was driving with a group of kids. In grade 7, I was driving with a group of kids. Not when I was at grade 7, I was driving, and we were in a Christian school here in South Africa, and we were going north in Africa, in one of the African countries. And I remember there were these two friends in the bus. Like, they were both deceased. Like, that was my best friend. He was with me in that year, and there was someone else who was also there, and she's also a very, very deep friend that's deceased. She was deceased a whole decade ago now, but both those people were in the bus, and I had the dream very weirdly of this person. He was a mass murderer. It wasn't really a dream, it was like a vision. My eyes were open, and I was just seeing this person in front of me, and the person told me their name. Their name was John the Axeman, and they said that he was a murderer. He said he was a murderer and was going to murder me, and that's all I could remember. My eyes were literally wide open, and I was very tired, and I was shocked. I was like, I asked my teacher, because he was a very deep Christian. I said, I just got this really, really deep vision of someone who told me he's going to kill me and stuff, and he prayed for me, because I really walked, if you think about walking like a path with God, if you're a deep religious person, that was like my life back then. I would walk the really deep road with God. I was in a bubble of Christians. We could pray. We felt like we had the type of bond with our teachers, and we had a holism of Christianity, so much so that I always felt back then that every problem, if I face something, it's like a deal with the devil, and I could always approach my teacher. There's always a solution. We can go to God. We can pray about it. Like if I'm in fear, I could always go on my knees and pray. It was a very religious school, and I always felt like there was salvation. We were like embalmed. What do you call it with olive oil and stuff? When people are embalming you and stuff. There's a word for it. I can't remember, but we were kind of baptized almost. Like, it's not really baptism, but it's like when people are spraying olive oil on your head, and so they embalm you with a blessing. And we did that practice a lot of time in our school, and I remember it was that night where we did that practice, and all the kids were kind of embalmed. And I felt, I slept so well, because I knew that kind of God was with me back there, and I just knew that, I was okay, because even though this demon was visiting me, I knew that it's okay, because God is stronger than this demon. And I felt extremely safe since that time. And well, I had my eyes open back then, so it was quite weird. But there was like 2 times that I had my eyes open, and I'm not going to go into it another time. But it was like also like an apparitional thing when I was very young. But it was like the only 2 times that I could remember where my eyes were open, and I saw like a visionary experience, almost like a psychedelic experience, what you get with LSD and psychedelic drug and stuff. But I used to suffer, like, just to wrap it up, of maladaptive daydreaming, and also nightmares, like grotesque nightmares, like very bad very vivid dreams, very vivid, almost mental imagery and apparitional, relations. And this has plagued me for a very big time in my life, even till today. I mean, I have very, very bad experiences, sometimes trips almost, dreaming, and this is horror. This is absolute horror. So it made me explore why, to me, this was a very big driving factor to make me explore the neurology of, and why such emotions and the depth of human emotions results. Like, what is emotion? What is horror? Why do we have this affinity with horror and emotion? And what is the absolute depth of emotions? Like, where would horror be? Like, if you think about emotion, where exactly on the scale of emotion would horror be? And I wanted to discuss pathos, because pathos, and I think the etymology of the word is kind of related to suffering and experience. If you ask me, pathos is related to suffering and experience and catharsis. And terms like the dark night of the soul comes to mind, like where you, in a way, you lose your soul, and you're like already in a hellish void. And that's also an interesting thing about a void that I just mentioned here. It's to me what the essence is of horror is this void, this eternal void that you can't escape. And I want to kind of discuss. I do think it makes me remember. Have you guys ever saw the series Black Mirror? There's this episode where I think the episode's name is Dark Museum or something. But there's this episode where there's it really attributes to me the depth of emotion, and it's where, well, there's a. Let me just think about how to kind of phrase it. It's about this mother, and she dies, I think. She doesn't die. She gets trapped. Yeah, she dies, and her husband calls her soul to go into this teddy bear, right? But the teddy bear is in a museum, and then their daughter gets born, and the man retrieves a teddy bear with their soul inside. So the only way she can come back to life is when she announces the teddy bear, right? So the only way to announce the teddy bear is for the daughter, then obviously obsessed with the teddy bear, to play with the bear. So the guy, the man, goes back to the museum and then gets the teddy bear, and he gives the teddy bear now to the little girl to play with. And while there's two types of emotions that, two types of like actions or triggers that the teddy bear can have, like it's love, I think it's a hug, and the other one is a slap. So there's a positive and negative emotion, and then the girl keeps hugging and slapping and stuff, and the woman obviously wants a hug the whole time. So the only way the girl can talk to the women is by clicking hug on the teddy bear. So she does it for a couple times, and then the girl loses track, and she just doesn't want to play with the bear anymore. She grows up and she foregoes the bear altogether. And then the woman she's trapped in this teddy bear. So the only way she can communicate with her daughter is through the bear. But the daughter lost track of the bear. She's not interested anymore in playing with the bear. So this woman is left with this doom, this infinity of doom in this bear. So this is one of this hellish, almost like a state of catharsis in the opposite sense. What you get with catharsis, like spiritual catharsis. This is almost the opposite of it. It's like a conjuringness. It's almost like akin to what Apostle Paul felt when God blinded him, or what Jesus felt when God the Father turned his back on him. That's almost like what you get with this hellish void state of horror and being. It's the ultimate tragedy of life. That in the way the old can be recreated, and I call this the death of the third form of emotion. Like, I'm going to quickly discuss to you the forms of emotion that I want to kind of narrate, because I think it's quite important in this video. And I think the first, if we talk about emotion, like there's three forms or different forms to it. Like Plato has this theory of forms. Like I would say that the first form is what you get with things like liking something, or liking, the ability to like something, acquainting, like being acquainted to someone, the ability to be something somewhat comparable to something, like a square being comparable to a rectangle because it's also shape, or a triangle being comparable to a circle. There's a shape different, like it's both shapes, right? So they're comparable, they're kind of acquainted. And agreeableness is another thing, like being agreeable, saying yes to something or so. Like that's to me the bottom filler of emotion, the first part of emotion. Then you get deeper forms or deflections of that part, like what you get with, let's say, a bit of loss or sadness or grief, that a bit of grief over something small, a bit of blueness. That's what I call the deeper part of emotion. But then you get what I call the third part, the depth of emotion, the deepest end. That's what you get with, but that's like the impending doom, agape love, like the godly loveness, hellish doom or hellish void, emotionally robbed, universal consciousness, things like that, vivid dreams, horror, gnosis, and insight, psychedelia, catharsis, ketosis. I think that's what you get with the deepest form of emotion, what I call the third depth of emotion, the deepest web of emotion. So this phase can make you kind of instantly depressed almost. I want to kind of, I think emotion is, I've grown quite attached to the Japanese culture in a lot of ways throughout my life. I've grown quite respectful with the Japanese way of life, because the Japanese culture is very intertwined with this form of bringing out emotion. They're, to me, they're different than the West. They don't shun emotion the way that we Westerners do. The Japanese who live out emotion, like what you get with the hikikomoris. The Japanese, they really live out their sorrows in actuality, like, almost like they're anathema. They live out in actuality. They create dolls. They if you think about suicide rituals in Japan, they're very emotional, expressive in a lot of ways. And it's something I've really grown a liking to the Japanese way, because of their ability to rectify emotion. And I want to kind of use an example here to discuss what I mean. But there's this tale of a Japanese woman, and she's in the village, and she lost friends, I think parents, and she wanted to recreate these people. I can't remember, there was a disaster in Japan once, a small town of Japan, and this lady, she used dolls, and she was a doll maker. What do you call it? Like an artisan, a person making dolls, and she recreated the forms of dolls for the people who lost in this disaster. I think it's a tsunami or something. And you would actually go through this village, and you would see all these dolls on the seats and the benches sitting, and all these dolls have a story. They actually signifies people. They're almost like the resurrections of the dead, of the people in these figurines. Another, yeah, so that's quite interesting. I want to talk about this thing a bit forward, but I do want to talk about a song about Meatloaf. I don't think if you guys ever listened to Meatloaf, but there was a song I listened as a teen to, and the song's name was Meatloaf's song, "The Objects in the Rearview Mirror." And this was where Meatloaf was singing in a form of respect to his friend. Now he was not. I can remember he sung about a boy who died, and I don't know if he actually knew the boy or something. Like, I know the songs are actually written by it's a Jewish guy, Jim Steinman. Jim Steinman wrote the songs. I don't know if Jim Steinman is actually experiencing, but he wrote the song about this boy who died, and the boy died very young. And he would recall, he was his friend. He recall how he and his friend played around, and how this late boy always played around with him and stuff, and always like made a bit of trouble and stuff, and how he kind of used this song to in remembrance to his friend. And it was a very, very tragic song about the young boy who died way before his time, and about how his family, everyone was just destroyed by this young man's death. And an artist I listen to a lot of times also, Steven Wilson or Porcupine Tree. They also have, Steven Wilson also believes in a lot of incidents. He believes in almost recreation of the horror. That's what I really love about the Porcupine Tree songs, is every Porcupine Tree song have a way of almost like being stone cold into horror. And there's a very deepness about the music that Porcupine Tree wrote. That's one thing about music. So this was like this were like two tracks, or a track or remembrance of horror in the sense of music that I would say is impending doom, or like the deep sense of emotion, like how that song to me tragically infused this idea of the deep sense of emotion, where there was almost like no way to go forward. They were almost like dead already, like Meatloaf's example of this boy dying. These people couldn't continue living. They were dead already. The loss of that poor boy, so young, made them dead. It completely obliterated any effort or any way of actually looking forward into this world. And I also wanted to talk about other examples from pulp fiction and classic fiction, about tales that I recall, this type of doom or this type of emotion being brought out into. And I remember in Naruto, I don't know if you guys watched anime, but as a kid I watched anime, and Naruto's episode, I can't remember which episode, but there was this episode where there was a boy who lost his parents in a car crash, and he's being unable to cope. He recreated this family in the form of dolls, right? It's almost like the above example, but it's just actually an anime example. But in this way, he started to unite with the dolls and exalt emotions to the dolls if they were human, right? And he would kind of meet the dolls and stuff. He would act as if they were human, and he became obsessed with this enactment. So he became so obsessed in believing these dolls that they are somewhat effacing to the souls of the parents. And he grows up with these dolls as if they were real. And this is just another example that I'm going to move into other examples here. But, I think the key takeaway of this video is talking about tragedy, loss, and horror. And in a way, my lust with horror throughout my life. Why I believe that horror has a kind of portal into the unknown. Something that's kind of scary, but important nonetheless to kind of embrace, to respect in a way. And I just kind of wanted to utilize this or these examples to kind of tell you guys about like the states of horror and why I do think it's important to kind of renounce it, because I do think that nobody really talks about this, but I do think that horror, or the almost like the foulness of reality, what I call it, like the Lovecraftian foulness of reality, the absolute horror, is something that people are afraid of to such a point where a lot of people don't really want to talk about this, especially in the Christian circles. People are detesting horror. They think it's from the devil, and they don't really want to talk about or discuss that horror might be real. Like, horror to them is always evil. And I don't see why no one's like really willing to sit down and talk about what if reality really were in horror, to a point where we really don't have a chance, and all these tales are just magnifications of actually magnifications of actually what is actually going on in the real reality that we are experiencing. And to me, it's just I guess I just wanted to make a video in regard to the fact of horror, and the respect that I kind of had for the Japanese with their ability to embellify horror in many ways, and critique and failure in actuality. And I don't really see us doing that, us Europeans. We don't really do that. We more go into the closet form where we're just hiding away if we are suffering. In Japan, it seems to be different. I really have respect for it. But I'm probably going to cut this video a bit short, and I don't really will ramble on. Okay, I'll probably ramble for too long about a topic that few people will find interesting. But thank you for listening. Tell me your thoughts, and I'd like to know a bit more about that.